Good morning, everyone. My name is Hugh Williams, and I'm the national spokesperson for the Canadian Automobile Dealers Association. Bonjour, mon nom est Hugh Williams, et je suis le porte-parole pour CADA. I'm very pleased to be here this morning on behalf of our heavy truck members. We have a robust heavy truck industry in this country. We were an essential service during COVID. Canada cannot be built without the use of heavy trucks. As I walked up to Parliament Hill this morning, there were 2 heavy trucks in service, one for a cement truck, one for a crane truck. Our trucks literally keep the economy rolling. Construction, agriculture, mining, supply chain logistics, every single grocery store in this country relies on heavy trucks, and we have an issue of utmost importance that we need to be resolved. This morning we have with us Mr. Kevin Disher, who's the Executive Director of the Truck Division, the Canadian Truck Division of CADA, to talk to us about this important regulatory problem. And of course, avec nous ce matin, on a Monsieur Charles Bernard, notre porte-parole pour CADA et CTD. Gentlemen, over to you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Kevin Disher, and I'm the Executive Director of the Canadian Truck Dealers Association, a division of the Canadian Automobile Dealers Association. CTD represents more than 700 heavy truck dealerships, and over 40,000 people are employed in Canada. Our members support businesses and supply chains in every region of the country and played a critical role in keeping goods moved across Canada every single day. Each year, approximately 30,000 Class 8 trucks are sold in Canada. This represents more than $8 billion in economic activity. We're here today because our industry is facing a serious challenge around the regulations and allow the importation of heavy trucks into Canada. And the consequences of inaction could have a significant impact on our supply chains, businesses, and consumer affordability across the country. A few targeted regulatory adjustments are needed to ensure Canada maintains a clear, workable path for the importation of U.S. certified heavy-duty trucks into the Canadian market. Without timely action and regulatory certainty from Canadian officials, there is a risk that the availability and the importation of new trucks in Canada could face significant disruptions as early as January 1st, 2027. Canada has limited domestic manufacturing capacity for medium and heavy-duty trucks. This underlines the importance of continued access to U.S. products, which are currently 95% of the supply in Canada. What we are looking to do today is to ensure that the urgency level is properly reflective of the risk that the Canadian economy is facing if this issue isn't solved rapidly. If Canada faces a shortage of heavy trucks, the impact will extend far beyond our industry. This issue affects every major sector of the Canadian economy: shipping, infrastructure, construction, forestry, mining, agricultural, and many more industries. Trucking moves most goods in Canada. Nearly $2 trillion in freight is transported annually across the country, supporting business, workers, and communities from coast to coast. If trucks become more difficult or more expensive to access, those costs move throughout the supply chain and ultimately impact Canadian businesses and households. We've had productive discussions over the last couple of days with key public officials, and there's been a real intent on collaborating with the industry to ensure that Canada has a practical regulations in place to preserve access to the commercial vehicles across the country. This is a priority of the CTD and our members, which is why we will continue to work constructively and with government officials to provide the industry insight and market intelligence needed to address this issue before it becomes a larger crisis for Canada transportation, networks, supply chains, and overall economy. Thank you very much, and I will now hand things over to Charles Bernard for remarks in French.
Thank you, Kevin. Bonjour tout le monde. Je me présente, je m'appelle Charles Bernard. Je suis économiste en chef pour les concessionnaires de camions du Canada, qui est une division au sein de la Corporation des associations de détaillants automobiles. Les concessionnaires de camions du Canada, c'est 40 000 emplois c'est plus de 700 points de vente et d'entreprises à travers le pays. Et c'est des entreprises qui ont un rôle fondamental au développement de notre économie, dans le transport des marchandises essentielles pour nos ménages et essentiellement à la survie de nos chaînes d'approvisionnement. En termes de volume, on parle de plus de 30 000 de camions de classe 8, des camions lourds qui sont vendus chaque année par ces concessionnaires-là. Et en termes d'impact économique, on parle de près de plus de 8 milliards en termes de retombées économiques pour le pays. Donc, c'est un secteur qui est central, qui est au cœur, comme je l'ai mentionné, du développement du Canada. Et l'enjeu est qu'on fait face à un problème assez central en termes d'avoir accès à ces camions-là. C'est un enjeu qui est lié à la réglementation qui permet l'importation de camions lourds au Canada. Et les conséquences de l'inaction peuvent avoir des impacts majeurs sur les chaînes d'approvisionnement, ce qui aurait un impact négatif pour les entreprises et les consommateurs. On parle d'ici de quelques ajustements réglementaires ciblés qui seraient nécessaires pour assurer que le Canada maintienne une voie claire et fonctionnelle, permettant l'importation de camions lourds certifiés aux États-Unis vers le marché canadien. Donc, sans action rapide et sans certitude réglementaire, il y a un risque réel de perturbation majeure dans la capacité du Canada d'avoir de l'approvisionnement de ces véhicules-là provenant des États-Unis, et ce, dès le 1er janvier 2027. C'est important de le mentionner, cette dynamique-là de dépendance avec le marché américain, parce que le Canada a une capacité assez limitée en production de camions, soit lourds ou de poids moyen. Et donc, cette relation avec les États-Unis en termes d'approvisionnement de véhicules est majeure. On parle d'environ 95 % des véhicules qui sont vendus au Canada par les concessionnaires de camions proviennent des États-Unis. Donc, clairement, il y a un aspect de dépendance à l'accès à ce marché-là qui est important, qui est critique pour, comme je l'ai mentionné, les concessionnaires, mais plus particulièrement pour l'entièreté de notre économie canadienne qui dépend de ces camions-là et de leur rôle dans notre économie. Donc, nous, aujourd'hui, c'est de s'assurer que le niveau d'urgence au sein des personnes concernées au gouvernement est relatif ou parallèle au risque que notre économie fait face si on ne règle pas cet enjeu-là. Pas besoin de mentionner que si le Canada faisait face à une pénurie de camions lourds, les impacts iraient bien au-dessus de notre industrie et des concessionnaires. Ça toucherait tous les grands secteurs de l'économie, qu'on parle du milieu forestier, du milieu minier, du milieu agricole, de la construction des infrastructures qu'on entend au sein de notre Canada et de notre ambition de faire grandir notre économie, la construction de logements pour répondre à la crise et aussi au support et à l'approvisionnement de marchandises pour nos ménages. Juste pour vous donner un exemple du volume, là, on parle près de 2 milliards en qu'on qui est transporté en transit par les camions chaque année au Canada. Donc, si les camions deviennent plus difficiles à accéder ou plus coûteux parce qu'on n'est pas capable d'en obtenir du marché américain et qu'on a un inventaire de camions qui est stagnant, mais ces coûts-là vont se distribuer tout au long de la chaîne d'approvisionnement, des concessionnaires jusqu'aux consommateurs et aux entreprises. Je tiens à mentionner qu'on a eu des discussions extrêmement productives avec plusieurs personnes clés au sein du gouvernement. Et je crois qu'il existe une vraie volonté de collaborer avec l'industrie pour s'assurer que le Canada dispose d'un cadre réglementaire pratique permettant de préserver l'accès aux véhicules commerciaux partout au pays. Évidemment, c'est clair, c'est une priorité pour les concessionnaires de camions du Canada. C'est pourquoi on va continuer de travailler de manière productive, collaborative, pour assurer qu'on donne l'information, l'expertise du marché, l'expertise terrain des concessionnaires de camions pour permettre au gouvernement de résoudre cet enjeu-là avant que ça devienne une crise plus importante pour le réseau de transport, pour les chaînes d'approvisionnement et pour l'économie canadienne dans son ensemble. On sait qu'on a un objectif gouvernemental de construire un Canada plus performant, plus productif, et on ne peut pas accomplir cette ambition-là sans avoir accès à des camions lourds. Et donc, c'est pour ça qu'on est là aujourd'hui. Je vous remercie pour votre temps et pour les questions suivantes. Et sur ce, je vais ramener mon collègue Hugh Williams pour une période de questions. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Charles. Thank you, Kevin. A couple of commentary just to make this real for Canadians. Number one, for our dealers, we obviously care about this. A complete shutdown in our ability to sell heavy trucks will obviously be catastrophic for the 600 dealers that we represent and the 40,000 employees. That's one factor. But for the objectives of the government, which are rightly placed on building Canada's economy, the objectives of the government, which are about a infrastructure program, a mining program, a competitiveness of the economy program, a loss of the ability to sell heavy trucks would be catastrophic for the economy. When we look at the overall picture of what it means on a just a tactical basis, the average large fleet turns over their vehicles on a pace that's once every 3 years. They get to 1 million miles and they move them out. So for a large fleet to lose a complete year, a model year, would be an absolute disaster for Canadian supply chain and logistics. Even for smaller fleets, they're turning these heavy trucks over every 5 years. So you'd imagine a 20% lack of productivity. That is reflected not just in Canada's ability to move forward on our ambitious agenda for infrastructure, our ambitious and proper agenda to make the Canadian economy work, but more seriously, it would have ramifications well beyond our industry. So we're here not just on behalf of our members, not just on behalf of the technicians that keep these trucks rolling, but more importantly for the economy and the Canadian people as a whole. This is a very serious issue, and we appreciate your time to it. And now, happy to take questions.
Merci. Thank you. So we can go ahead with the question period. Nick, I don't know if you just arrived, if you have a question in the room. If not, for the people who are on Zoom, I just ask you to raise your hand, please, and I'll get to you as soon as I can. So let's go with Todd Phillip from Canadian Auto Dealer. You can go ahead.
Yeah, good morning, gentlemen. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, good morning, Todd.
Hey, Hugh, this is a question, maybe a political question for you off the hop here. We know kind of politically Canada's trying to chart a more independent policy, you know, in a lot of areas, certainly with CUSMA negotiations coming up and, you know, trying to flex their own muscles. So is there a risk that, you know, we're getting swept up to a certain extent in this independent regulatory path, you know, ignoring the kind of day-to-day, you know, as you mentioned, the supply integration issues that the government just isn't largely aware of? Is that kind of what's at play here?
Well, I would say this. The Prime Minister has been very vocal, as have leaders of the opposition, to talk about the fact that we're in a trade rupture with the U.S. And the U.S. is charting somewhat of an independent path on a number of fronts, probably too many to name. I think this is a case where we've had a long history of regulatory alignment, and because of some, independent regulatory shifts, and some of them quite major in terms of, moving from EPA to NHTSA as an example, the language on both sides of the border no longer matches. So this is more of a paperwork problem and a paperwork misalignment than it is a misalignment of vision. These trucks, I think it's important to note, are going to be cleaner than ever in terms of their NOx emissions and cleaner than ever in terms of the greenhouse gas emissions. But without the right regulatory recognition, we will not be able to have these trucks sold in Canada. I would also make the very important point that my colleague spoke about the January 1st deadline. That's the actual deadline for those trucks coming over for the 2027 model year. But in our business, the truck business, what happens is truck dealers are in discussions for pre-orders, for pre-allocation now with manufacturers. That process can't go on, and allocation for the Canadian market is currently being lost. The pre-order period for the 2027 model year begins this August. So at the end of August, what happens is the trucking companies, the fleets that I spoke of earlier, are making decisions for what they need to renew, and they will not be able to order those trucks. I think that the government may be operating under the impression that this is a 2027 problem. This is a yesterday problem that we've talked about as a trucking association, and manufacturers have been in dialogue with officials for well over a year. This is the first time we, as the actual retailers, have recognized that the manufacturers and the government have not been able to resolve this problem.
I think, Todd, you might have a follow-up. You raised your hand again. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, if that's okay. This is a question either for Kevin or Hugh, really. I mean, I know the association is newly formed, and had an official launch a couple months ago, Canadian Truck World. So do you find that it's taken a while, or do you find that you're now getting the government's attention in these discussions? You mentioned that there was some discussions with officials. Until now, probably there wasn't the same, high-level advocacy work going on. So are they starting to, I guess, recognize the CTD and have these conversations?
Yeah, a couple of points there, Todd, and I'm glad you raised it. Heavy-duty truck dealers, and they're an important and have been an important part of the Canadian Auto Dealers Association since the 1980s. I think what's changed recently is the structure internally of CADA to create a specific executive director to deal with those challenges. One of the examples that I used with officials yesterday is that when we've worked on issues for the Canadian Auto Dealers Association and our truck dealer members in conjunction, we've usually been able to resolve the issues that affect them both. The best example of that, and it actually relates to today's discussion, is the issue of during COVID being named an essential business. During COVID, car dealers, heavy truck dealers on this side of the border, we had discussions with government about the fact that the economy couldn't roll without our dealer members on the service, the parts, and new sales of heavy trucks, and they couldn't function without the sale service of new automobiles. We do all the maintenance work on police vehicles, emergency, provide all the entire new car support and new car truck supply chain. So in Canada, both heavy trucks and light-duty dealers were named essential services, and we had similar discussions with our U.S. counterparts with Homeland Security, where dealerships were named an essential service. Canada, and that recognition clearly shows that you cannot run an economy without our services. So what's happened is that Kevin, who I'll let speak here in a moment, has a deep background in senior level management in the trucking world, but actually started as a truck technician and knows firsthand how important these trucks are. And Kevin, I wouldn't mind if you wouldn't mention the impact of trucking when we have a national disaster and trucking is held back. Over to you.
Yeah, this issue of pre-ordering in the truck world is not new. I mean, it did happen in COVID, for one thing, when supply chains were interrupted and lead times were very long. Some other emission regulations happened in 2008 as well too. When we take a look at that interruption with Canada, roughly about 30,000 vehicles, you're about 10% is the issues. You're about $8,000 to $10,000 units a year in a loss. So that's significant in Canada. When we take a look at the supply chain as well, that slows down fleet purchases. That slows down repair in that division. So it's not just the actual order of the truck; it's also parts and service that suffer as well too.
Thank you.
Sorry. I guess just you guys talked about how the manufacturers had been engaged with the government for more than a year on this, and then you guys have come in more recently. I'm just wondering if you're able to contextualize why we're at a point where it's so urgent and we're so close up on the timelines, right? It seems like a lot of times in government, it's kind of this, we need to make a last-ditch Hail Mary on this thing. And so I'm just wondering if discussions have been ongoing for more than a year, like how did we get to this point where it's just such an urgency now?
Yeah, as we brought on an executive director for the truck division, we began surveying dealers and asking them what their most important issue was. And it was no surprise that dealers had a high level of business anxiety with respect to the supply of vehicles with this 2027 model year problem that manufacturers had been speaking to them about. The manufacturers are very active, and they also have an engine manufacturer association, and they're active in all kinds of jurisdictions to make sure that their vehicles are compliant. When we heard from dealers that this was their number one issue, we took the step of meeting with every manufacturer and asking them, what is the state of the discussions with government? What are the technicalities that are involved here, and what are some of the solutions? And we heard from every manufacturer in lockstep that this was an industry-wide problem and one that needed a regulatory fix, and we explored those options with them. So, going through their pathways to discussions with different ministers' offices, different senior officials who are responsible for this, detailed technical briefings, we were aware of an entire chain of discussions between the manufacturers who have rightly responsibility for getting these regulations correct. But they were just at a loss as to why things hadn't moved ahead. So once we were armed with that knowledge, we immediately reached out to officials to brief them. We have more meetings today with senior ECCC, Environment Climate Change Canada, to see what solutions they have. But nobody to date has been able to say, hey, we have a clear path and we're moving immediately on it. And as I said before, this is a yesterday problem as opposed to a tomorrow problem.
And so just to follow up on that very last point that there's no clear path, I guess I'll rephrase the question a little bit. It's just why is Ottawa moving so slowly on this, I guess, considering the issues at play?
You know, I want to be fair to Canadian officials that this, number one, is not a problem of their making. We've had, you know, regulatory alignment for a long time, and for various reasons that has been, you know, changes in the U.S. side of the equation have made it out of step. I think officials, you know, on a very top level tell us, you know, the focus has been on light duty emissions, capacity problems, those sorts of things. I think what's important, though, to recognize at this moment in time is that, you know, whether they have capacity issues or other constraints that are on them, you know, if the Prime Minister rightly sends the message we're in a trade rupture and we have to do extraordinary things, regulatory fixes like this that will drive the economy have to be treated with that same level of urgency. I'm pleased to report that we got that level of urgency from ministers' offices yesterday, but you know, level of urgency you know, has to be met with an actual solution.
Can I just ask one more? I'm just wondering which
Sure.
ministers' offices have you been engaged with?
We had very productive discussions with the Transport Minister's senior leadership yesterday. We also had very productive discussions with Dominic LeBlanc's office yesterday, who you know, immediately understood the gravity of the situation. Productive discussions with the Minister of Environment's staff, and actually throughout the day there were a number of conference calls where ministers were not ministers but minister staff were joined in for cell phone conferences to advance the ball. I'm confident that, you know, when the Canadian public hears this challenge, they'll understand that the government has to move on this, and I think that the process, though, needs an expeditious review because it's happening as we speak. Thank you.
All right, there are no more questions in the room, no questions on Zoom. Did you have anything you wanted to add to your statement?
I appreciate the coverage. We'll be busy on Parliament Hill today with officials and others, and available for interviews throughout the day if others have more detailed technical questions. So thank you for having us.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you. This concludes the press conference.